controls. I'm really delighted to be introducing my former student, Ryan Teitman, tonight. To make something from nothing is a king's craft. To name something is to know it differently. Every dream is its own kind of shaky cathedral. Cold finds the slivers of body we show the world. We only praise what we cannot keep. These aphoristic lines tether the poems in Ryan Teitman's beautifully realized first book to place and to history and to the internalization of both. His troubled love affair with cities in general and with his native Philadelphia in particular inspires a meditation on the nature of what we build and how anything created necessarily originates from nothing, whether it's a poem or a statue, a person or a city. Ryan's deeply thoughtful poems possess an acute sense of the fragility of made things, the temporality of their presence in our lives. We only praise what we cannot keep. We could not keep Ryan Teitman at Penn State. He graduated in 2004, went back to the Philadelphia area, and worked as a newspaper reporter for a few years before applying to graduate school. At Indiana University, he served as poetry editor for the Indiana Review, earned an MA and an MFA, and then moved on to a Stegner Fellowship in Poetry at Stanford. He won the Fine Line competition at Mid-American Review, and Oliver de la Paz chose his poem for an Intro Journals Award. Jane Hirschfield selected Ryan's book, Litany for the City, for BOA Edition's Al Poulin Prize, and it was published to acclaim in 2012, the same year that Ryan won a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship. Ryan is now the Gettysburg College Emerging Writer in Residence. Please join me in welcoming Ryan back tonight.
I'm going to start out with the first poem in my book, adventurously. This is called Philadelphia, 1976. A still night has its own cruel music. The catch of bridge cables plucked by stone-scented wind. The low bent hum of the Delaware rippling like a singing saw. There are other cruelties too. The extra inning double in the gap that sends the summer crowd shuffling for the parking lot. Those are the nights when any boy would drop Pabst empties off the Tacony-Palmyra Bridge, then watch the stars strip off their summer dresses and dive naked into the water. I wave from the bridge because maybe Lefty's pitching a gem tonight. Maybe the moon's a cut fastball dropping off the horizon. Maybe 216 strands of loose city light stitch the sky together. Someone told me that the moon was made of cork and leather and old bar songs and jars of railroad sparks and braided horsehair. But what's our city made of? Everything's been growing too quickly. The skyline's becoming a night brighter than day. Glass-walled buildings muscle their way up the cityscape, and I've never trusted anything that doesn't throw a shadow. So come with me to the bridge. We'll watch the fireworks strain into the night. We can fix their lights into a constellation of an ox pulling down a house. Then let the spent flakes of soot settle on our eyelids, like wafers of host dropped onto tongues, so that when we open our eyes, we'll swallow the tiny, failed bodies in every possibility of light. Thanks so much to Penn State and the Creative Writing Program, and Lauren Osberg and Matt Perez for this lovely drink, and Elizabeth Kadetsky for having me here. It's great to be back at Penn State. A lot of it looks different, a lot of it looks the same. I think last time I was here, I might have had a little more hair, but other than that, you know, Penn State is Penn State, so it's always nice to be here. In Philadelphia, there's a museum that's called the Mutter Museum. In my mind, I think it's called the Museum of Genetic Deformities, but that is not what it's really called, I'm sure. But for some reason, they used to take us there all the time for school trips. It was traumatic. And this poem is based on an actual thing, an actual exhibit that they had there, and it's called The Cabinet of Things Swallowed. At the medical museum, we fourth graders crowd around the oddities. The tiny jarred fetus turning almost imperceptibly, like the rotation of an infant moon. The model of a syphilitic eye sagging like the cut fig my father pushed around his plate at breakfast as he read this morning's paper. Betsy Wilcox follows me from exhibit to exhibit. When she sees the human horn display, a taut wax face with a stalk like a black locust limb sprouting from the forehead, she grabs a fistful of my shirt and buries her face in my chest. The glass cases of the museum showcase the horror of what our bodies can become. Betsy trails me closely as we pass the hundreds of fleshy pounds of the world's largest colon, curled and asleep like some biblical slug. We come to a wooden cabinet with long, thin drawers. The sign reads, "Things Swallowed." I slide out the top drawer to find what I expected. Wheat pennies, safety pins, suit buttons, all ranked and filed and labeled with faded script. I close that drawer and open the next. It holds larger treasures. Threaded needles, thimbles fuzzed over with rust, fan-shaped seashells, a book of matches from a New York bar. The items are bigger in each new drawer. The next has a woman's black glove with gold thread tracing the wrist, a light bulb, and a silver pocket watch still ticking like a tiny robin's heart. The next, a gold collection plate from a Presbyterian church, a red-glazed salt cellar. I pull open the second to last drawer where there is a single claw hammer. The head is dull black. The handle's wood is wrapped with the stains of fingerprints. There is one drawer left. "Don't," Betsy says, as I reach for the handle. And in her wide, wet eyes, I can barely see the reflection of the cloud-white marble I swallowed on my 4th birthday. So I grew up Catholic. Don't worry, it turned out okay. And I feel like a lot of that sort of language and a lot of that rhythm made its way into my poetry. And I think that's something that really came into my first book. And this is a poem called Cathedrals. We tent our fingers to make a cathedral. This is how it's always been done, how a whisper between two palms becomes an architecture we can't fit into our mouths. We hear words like knave and remember shoveling piles of tulips into a burnt-out flatbed. An old man says cupola, and I think of knotty loaves of rye stacked like cordwood in a baker's pantry. I dream of a church's unfinished dome squinting upward like the battered eye socket of a bare-knuckle boxer. Every dream is its own kind of shaky cathedral, joists and vaults bracing it against the weight of another morning invoked against us. There's a cathedral built from the leg bones of draft horses and saints, a cathedral of birds scaffolding the sky. A cathedral of bodies opening to each other on beds smooth as altars. A cathedral of hands unbuttoning the skin of every prayer within reach. So I worked as a newspaper reporter, like Charlotte said, and then I went to graduate school in Indiana, which was a really important time for me, and I had a really great time there. Another Big Ten state school. I felt very at home there after Penn State. My fellow students were saying, "Oh my gosh, there's so many people, so many students around when class is let out." And I thought, well, how else would you know that the 11:15 class is out unless 6,000 students streamed out of their classrooms? But I seem to always be writing about places that I'm about to leave. And this was a poem that was inspired by the Indiana landscape that sort of came into being just as I was about to leave it. It's called Ode to a Hawk with Wings Burning. When our eyes can't adjust to the fog of late light burning off under a heat of darkness, a black flower blooms for a single minute, and the bees waiting for its nectar die of thirst. They drop one by one into a furry pile around the stem, not knowing that the scarcity of its opening fails to make the juice any sweeter. We lie when we think that the rare and the sacred are like twin unborn colts, legs tangled as they float in the barrel of their mother's belly. A girl keeps a halved pear in a jar by her bedside and says that it's her dead puppy's ear, so everyone believes her when she kisses the glass container goodnight and carries it on walks around the neighborhood. You can learn the most horrible things if you listen in the moment between night and day. I would name that moment, but to name it would make it grow, would give old women the leisure to kneel at the altar and light candle after candle to ward it all away. I won't let it have a cadence of the commonplace. I won't let my mother's botany book grow any bigger. I won't let the neighborhood kids catch another creature for my dreams, like the day two boys dipped a hawk in gasoline and tossed it into the night with its wings still burning. We didn't know what to do when the deer tangled his antlers in the rusty spokes of the landfill bicycle at the edge of town, so we rode from street to street, leaving baskets of baby fish at the doors of every church we could find. Pray for the filly with the lame leg. Pray for the father with the iron burn on his thigh. Pray for the moon to float down like a lost paper lantern that finds a midnight funeral and settles, still smoldering, on the bare, burning branches that cradle the ashes of a hawk. So this is the last poem from my book. It's called Circles, and originally this poem wasn't even in the book. I thought that this was maybe the beginning of something new, and then Jane Hirschfield, who is very generous and also very wise, told me that my book doesn't end, it just kind of stops. So about a week before it was due for its final edits to the publisher, I had to figure out a new poem, and I spent about an hour panicking, and then I started looking through my poems, and what I thought was the beginning of something new ended up being the end of what I had been working on. And I think this was the first poem I wrote in California, and it's called Circles. Let what begins continue. Let your dog turn up his nose at the plate of vegetables you delicately smashed on the floor. How far are we now from the place they sealed the boy inside the well when they couldn't figure out how to save him? They didn't want to hear his cries anymore, so they boarded up the mouth and continued with the picnic even as their children grew wet with rain. This summer, tornadoes will circle our town. A runaway will circle her final destination on a map, and dogs will stalk circles around a wounded deer. I couldn't tell you how to dress that leg. You've never been alone before, but I forget that sometimes. I know how to make bandages from bed sheets, My grandmother told me stories from the war, how her garden was full of scrap metal, how she served tomatoes dressed in oil and rust, yet sweeter than before. She'd say, "Let what begins continue," and gesture vaguely at the sky, as if the sky was where everything happened. So I'm going to read a few new poems now. So these first couple poems are my first California poems, and as a native Pennsylvanian, I was disturbed by California. It was too warm, and it was too beautiful, and there was too many flowers. It seemed wrong in a lot of ways. And I think these first couple poems are me trying to work that out, learning that I can actually, enjoy that, instead of thinking that the other shoe is about to drop at any moment. I got out of there before a major earthquake, so that's what I'm considering as a victory. This first poem is called Prayer. I walk home through the city. The stars wait behind the clouds like a people without a nation, and windows yawn open all through the neighborhood. Street lights clap off. Storefronts bite shut. I stop at a pearing tree whose branches curtsy with fruit. St. Francis carried 2 pears in his cupped hands for months, until the sweetness of rot called down hundreds of birds. They perched across his body, and he wore the flock like a coat to survive the winter. My jacket keeps out the chill. I walk home through streets as quiet as confessionals. Traffic lights shepherd nothing but wind. I want to live inside this silence and ruin it. This poem is called Work. Some mornings, the clouds settle rooftop low, holding us in place like a specimen slide. I spend my days wondering how the hammer weighs the hand that holds it, or how the starlings apron the stoplights at Alcatraz and Adeline. A glass worker told me once that she could tell by the scars who bandages their fingers and who kisses closed the wounds. I don't know how my father woke hours before sunrise each morning and worked until long past sunset. Sleep was a country to retire to, an Ecuador. I live where the light is thin and clothes us like linen. In the hills above town, a black snake scrawls across the path like a signature. I still have countries left to discover, and ballets of work for my hands to learn. So after reading that last poem and thinking about this next poem, I would just like to preface this with the statement that I actually have a very good relationship with my father. So keep that in mind. This is called Sonnet with Horses Where the Turn Should Be. I was afraid of my father. Each night he came home from work, set appeals on the desk, and paid bills as the dog slept under his feet. My father, who never hit me, nor ever raised his voice to me more than once or twice, who never spared me any affection. I feared him the way I feared horses, their long muscles moving like unsheathed swords, their eyes silver dollar-sized wells of darkness. Something noble in the face of a horse, Larry Levis wrote, made it incapable of treachery. My father had the look of a horse worked years too long, laboring not to falter. That title gives a way different indication of where that poem is going. I think I may need to reconsider that one. I don't think you can transition from having everyone like, oh, that's clever, and then start, I was afraid of my father. Like, nope. Too much tone shift. Okay. This poem is called The Dream Protects the Dreamer. Freud had this notion that that when you're dreaming, your dream is protecting you while you sleep. And I sort of took that, I was thinking about that. It's kind of a beautiful sentiment, and I wondered if it works both ways. So that's how this poem came into being. The dream protects the dreamer. The dream protects the dreamer, and in turn, the dreamer protects the dream. They keep each other safe. The dream wets a rag and wipes caked blood from the dreamer's ear. The dreamer stitches up a gash on the dream's thigh with thread he unwound from an old baseball. They both thought it would be different than this. From their camp in the hills, they overlook the city, which is quiet. No neighborhoods on fire, no city blocks reduced to rubble. The dream limps to its rifle and tells the dreamer that they need to go higher, to find more cover. Somewhere they can't see the city, somewhere they won't be found. The dreamer nods and stirs dirt into the fire's embers with the toe of his boot. He's thinking about how they sleep together each night in their sleeping bag, how they strip down to nothing and hold each other to share the heat. They never talk about it. Some nights he holds the dream, and others the dream holds him. The dream cups its hand over the dreamer's heart, and the dreamer hears the faint concert of his heartbeat within his body. They hike farther up into the hills, into fog so thick they can almost part it like drapery. They can't see each but each hears the other's breathing. The dreamer wonders if the dream is reaching out for his hand and if he should reach out too. After an hour, he begins to forget the dream's face, and the dream begins to forget his. When the fog lifts, the dream is alone. It listens for the dreamer's footsteps, but hears nothing. It shouts for him again and again, though it knows it shouldn't, but gets no response. So the dream slumps down onto the leaf-softened hillside and settles the rifle across its lap. It remembers the dreamer was carrying the sleeping bag. It's near evening and getting colder. The dream plants the rifle butt into the ground and hoists itself up again. It wants to make the summit by nightfall. The dreamer could be waiting. This poem is called The Foxes. Inside my heart, a thimble-sized fox has made its den. It nurses its kits to the rhythm of the heart's quaint beating. They pump at her belly like tiny pistons, then fall asleep nestled between their mother and the warm muscle. When I'm still, I can feel them, the kits roughhousing, their mother's coarse tongue licking their coats clean. I know that soon the kits will leave the den. They'll chew through my skin to get their first taste of air, because to them, I'm nothing but a body. So when I was in graduate school, everyone was writing obads. I don't know why. It was just a thing that everyone did, and I never quite hopped on the bandwagon. But I had this poem that I was been tinkering with for a while, and it had a lot of terrible titles, and I think I was trying to get at the heart of it, and then I realized sort of what it was. and it's kind of this failed obad. So I just called it obad. I didn't want to put failed in it. It sets up bad expectations for the reader. So this is called obad, which, if you don't know, is a parting song for two lovers in the morning. So they're leaving, and this is the sort of the regret and sweetness of that moment. She was a girl, but more muscle, more heat, more throat. In her hands, boys turned to birds, and birds lost their wings. You could follow her home by the trail of wings. They said her soul was thin as an arrow and twice as sharp. Boys wrote her songs full of lyrics like, "You make my heart a Belgium when I ought to be a France," or "I'd eat a jar of Rattlers if you said you'd be my girl." One boy played the cello till he sawed through the strings. Another wrote sonnets till his fingers broke. We'd have ruined ourselves if she'd let us, because she was a girl, but closer. Her breath felt closer. Her voice sounded closer. At night, when the dark lost the last of its velvet, we thought of her, and we all grew closer. So these new poems that I've been working on, for some reason, the speaker's father keeps not being around, and my father worked a lot when I was, he still works a lot, but when I was young, he had to work these, he works at an oil refinery in South Jersey, so he worked these really long, sort of brutal shifts, so I had the experience of knowing that he was doing this for the family and that he cared about us a lot, but also required him to be away from us. And I think only now I'm starting to understand how that plays out within a family. And I think that's affecting the dramatic situations of some of my poems. This poem is called Motherland. And yeah, I just have two more for you. So, this one and then a longer one. Motherland. The days unfold like maps. Fresh dirt in the garden, black as cake, grows warm. The roses perform a silent recital, each playing its part from memory. I wait for my father the way men wait for a train. I wait for my father the way a dancer waits for music. My mother is a curtain in the window. She calls me in to fit my shadow for a suit. I keep still as she pinches the tape around its wrist. Around her neck, my mother's pearls clink like teeth. Your shadow grows faster than you do, she says. She says that waiting is a kind of dancing. At night, I dance with the stillness. My blood waits behind my chest like a man behind a locked door. My father waits in another country. So this last poem is it's called In the Story My Mother Tells, and sometimes in poetry you get points for obviousness, and is based on a story that my mother tells about her grandfather. My mother's side of the family is Ukrainian, but they were not, and they came to the United States after the First World War, but they were not living in Ukraine. They were ethnic Ukrainians living in Poland, in that very sort of fluid Polish-Ukrainian border there. And this is a slightly fictionalized story of a story that I heard many times from my mother, which was always one of my favorites. in the story my mother tells. In the story my mother tells, her grandfather is a boy, maybe 10 years old, when he steals the rifle from under his parents' bed and shoots a German soldier guarding a stopped train. The soldiers are lazing in the Polish countryside, passing cigarettes between them, cracking walnuts under the butts of their rifles, unaware of the boy in a stand of trees on the hillside. He licks his thumb and smudges the spit across the gun sight, something he's seen his father do. The shot sends the others diving for cover, scanning the tree line. By then, the boy is gone. They arrive at the house later that day. They've searched 4 houses already, looking for the rifle and its owner. The boy sees the soldiers' faces for the first time as his mother invites them in, and he's surprised at how young they are, how they take off their helmets as they talk with his mother. She brings them each a cup of tea and slice of bread and follows as they search from room to room, opening the closets and drawers, stripping the sheets from the beds, then helping her refold them. When they finish the search, the one in charge nods at the boy's mother and ushers the rest outside, where they begin to draw water from the well. But the boy's mother produces a bottle of vodka from inside the folds of her apron and offers it to them on her arm, making a big show, like a waiter at a Paris restaurant. The soldiers take the bottle and trudge down the road to the next house on their list. And the boy, my mother tells me, stands at the well, unaware that deep inside it, sticking from the bucket like a mop handle, is the rifle his mother had so carefully hidden. Thank you.
That's actually a very good idea. Anybody have any questions for Ryan? We did a Q&A earlier if people weren't there. I know that you kind of drink some water here. Anybody have questions for me while Ryan is drinking water? But anybody has any questions, Ryan, I'll be happy to field them. All right. Since I already stood up for this, thanks for showing up, but please take your time asking questions of Ryan. And we'll be doing more soon. Keep posted. All right. Thank you anyway. So sorry about the weird question thing.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. So please feel free to ask our poet, a fantastic poet, any questions you may or may not have.
I can go back up to make it seem more
It's
legit.
more official.
I feel like there were a lot of people who were at the Q&A earlier, so you might be all questioned out. So that's okay, but yeah.
You said you were a reporter for how long before you went back into NEIU?
I was a reporter for about 3 years. So I graduated, I had a degree in English. I had worked a little bit as a freelance reporter around here for the Center Daily Times. And then when I moved back to Philadelphia, I picked up some freelancing jobs and then started working full-time at different papers around Philadelphia.
And how did being a reporter affect your writing?
I think that as a reporter, I think I got my sort of first real-world writing training, where you can't just say, you know, oh well, you know, I'm not feeling up to it today. Maybe I'll try again tomorrow, because you have an editor who is sort of breathing down your neck to have you get things in on deadline. So I think having those deadlines every week and having to produce writing for people who will look at it with a critical eye, I think is a great training. And I think it really got me ready for graduate school and got me, I think, serious about my writing in a way that was really beneficial. I think I felt ready when I went to grad school. not just from having a little time off from it, knowing that I want, and really realizing that creative writing was something I wanted to do, but also having that real world training. Thanks. Yeah.
Were the 3 poems entitled "Dear Dr. Franklin" supposed to be read together, or are they their own separate entities?
I think that's a really good question. I used to send them to literary magazines together, thinking, oh, this is a cool set of poems, they can all be read together. And editors sent them back to me and said, these are all too much alike, I don't want any of them. So I think there were also more of them, which, ended up on the cutting room floor. But yeah, I think of them now as a set to be read together, but more as sort of points that exist within the book, as sort of a conversation that lets me as a poet talk about the things that I'm interested in. I think for a while the book, I wasn't sure who my speakers were talking to, and I think having putting in Benjamin Franklin in as a sort of stand-in for Philadelphia allowed me to talk about things that I was interested in a way that I couldn't before. Thanks, that's a good question. Yeah?
In your writing, it seems like surreal images are often very important. Like the plow cutting through the cello is one that I remember. So for you, do those images come from real things that you've heard about? Do you kind of craft them? And how do you walk the line between clarity and surprise?
Sure. I think surrealism can be sort of a dangerous area to walk, because I think it can get divorced from real emotion if it's done in a way that just seems like kind of wackiness. And I think I try to look for images that are striking and create images that are striking that still work to advance the poem emotionally, and I hope not necessarily just to be surprising for surprise's sake. I think it's a fine balance, because what I love about some more surreal poems is that they can access things that you can't necessarily access in realism. Sort of some more intensity, more depth of emotion, in a different way. Almost like, not that they can do things that realism can't, but they come at it from a different angle that can seem fresh. But yeah, it's always a danger just to, be weird for weirdness' sake. I think then you get into some of the maybe poor Jim Carrey movies and things like that. So that seemed overly mean. I feel like I should apologize to Jim Carrey, I guess. I think I got away from your original question, but I hope that answers it. Yeah, Matt.
Do you have any books for sale here?
I do have books for sale. Thanks for asking, Matt. I have some books over there that I have fanned gently into an arrangement. They're $15. I will be happy to sign any books that you want to buy or that you may happen to already have. One book there is already signed for some reason, I don't know. It came from my publisher, already signed by me, which is kind of a mystery of the world now. And yeah, I would be happy to talk to anyone after the reading as well.
Cool.
Okay.
A question.
Yeah.
What is BOA Press, and how does one submit work there?
Okay. So BOA Editions is a press run out of Rochester. It's a small independent press. It is home to some, I think, legends of poetry. Lee Young Lee was first published. He published, I think, his first 3 books with BOA before moving to, I think, with Norton, one of the big presses. Bridget Pekin Kelly, if you never read Song, that's an amazing, amazing collection. She publishes with them. Lucille Clifton, who they just put out Lucille Clifton's complete poems. So some real, I think, legends of poetry are published by BOA, plus a lot of great contemporary writers a lot of great young contemporary writers, Araceli Gourmet, Sean Thomas Dougherty, and Craig Morgan Teicher, I'm not sure how to say his last name, Teicher. But yeah, I think there are a lot of great books there, and they do a great job on their design. For first books of poetry, they run the A. Poulin Junior Prize, which is for a first book of poetry. You submit, and if you win, they publish your book. They give you some money. They also just recently started a short fiction prize, so if you have a short story collection, you can send that to them. If you are fortunate enough already to have a poetry collection, they do have reading periods for established authors at different times. You'd have to check their website to see when that is. But there's only 3 people on the staff there, but they put out 20 between 10 and 20 books a year. And looking at the books, you would not, I mean, usually when that happens, they're maybe not the nicest books if, they're putting out tons of them, but they have some great designers that they work with, and they put out some beautiful books, both in design and in content. So I'm really happy to be a member of the BOA family. And the products of their work and my work are over there, so feel free to buy one if you like. It makes an excellent gift for Orthodox Christmas, if any of you celebrate that. Actually, I think it's like 4 days late for that, so sorry. But anyway, thank you all. I have a really great time being here, and it's great to be here.